In December, boats and men arrived in the St. Louis area from the east, completing the preliminary part of one of America's most famous journeys. This is the reunion tour, Lewis and Clark together again, or at least as accurate a recreation as you'll find in this bicentennial year. So that answers the questions of what and who. But Anne Marie Berger thought the really interesting question was, why?
The Lewis and Clark reenactors may simply look like a bunch of guys dressed up in period costumes, but it's much, much more than that. And it has been for some time.
Well, I'm here for the children. We've talked to personally 5,000 children plus since Yankton to here. And if you can see them light up and become interested in history, that's why I'm here.
Back in 1998, our cameras caught up with a few members of the Discovery expedition on the maiden voyage of their newly constructed red pirogue, an exact replica of the one Lewis and Clark used. But in the beginning, this crew and their boats weren't assembled for the purpose of educating the public about Lewis and Clark. Glenn Bishop, a lifelong resident of St. Charles, originally established this group as a way of promoting his hometown during their Lewis and Clark celebrations. Bishop decided St. Charles needed a replica of the keelboat Lewis and Clark used during their expedition. He constructed a full-scale reproduction of the boat. In 1996, Bishop, his fellow die-hard crew of volunteers, and his keelboat took to the waters of the Missouri River, retracing a portion of Lewis and Clark's journey from Wood River, Illinois, to St. Joseph's, Missouri, and back again.
Well, the first stop we made was in Washington, Missouri, and it just, I thought it was just going to be a joyride for a bunch of clowns dressed up like Lewis and Clark. But the reception we received there put me in tears. It's amazing how people have really appreciated what we're trying to do.
In January 31st, 1997, he had it stored in a warehouse. The warehouse caught fire, and we lost the keelboat in 15 minutes. 14 years worth of work. When the press went to Glenn and said, yeah, how do you really feel about this tragedy? Glenn said, well, I cried a little bit. He said, but I wasn't completely satisfied with that boat. I'll build another. And that's when all of us started coming out to work with Glenn and do this. And eventually learned that his vision was, I'd like to do the whole trip.
To make that happen, Bishop and his crew completed the reconstruction of Lewis and Clark's red and white pirogues in 1998 and rebuilt the keelboat that was lost in the fire. Since then, the Discovery Expedition of St. Charles has traveled up and down our region's rivers, dressed as Lewis and Clark and their men. They have been selected as the official reenactors for the Lewis and Clark bicentennial and are setting forth on their greatest journey, retracing the entire waterway portion of the original 1803 to 1806 voyage of Lewis and Clark. Unfortunately, Glenn Bishop died in 2001, but his crew continues what he started. On August 31st, 2003, the Discovery Expedition of St. Charles began their journey in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, just as Lewis and Clark did. Since then, they have traveled 973 miles down the Ohio River. When the explorers arrived in Cairo, Illinois, they took a right and continued north on the Mississippi.
By late November, the Discovery Expedition made it here to Cape Girardeau. And just like all stops on the route, the community was waiting for them.
Sandra Gotch eagerly awaits the arrival of the expedition. Her husband Walter is a member of the crew, and except for a few days in September, She hasn't seen him since this journey began in August.
And originally he was going to do 3 weeks on and 3 weeks off, but he came home and was only home a few days. And he said, "Do you really mind if I go back?" I said, "No."
Well, we're going to put this right.
It's great to be hugged.
Not much hugging.
Hugging them all.
Well, I feel highly blessed that to be able to do this historical reenactment. And especially with these group of guys out of St. Charles, they really know what they're doing.
Left. 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 Well, the weather's been wonderful, actually. We've had a few rainy nights and down at Cairo, and got in some wind and stuff there. The camp was wet, but we dry out. At one place, for 5 hours, we had 700 kids an hour.
But a lot of times, especially when we get further west, people will bring us a lot of venison, deer, and buffalo. And we're from there wearing an opposite of what white women.
And for those children who aren't lucky enough to see the expedition in person, thanks to modern technology, the expedition can come to them. With help from the National Park Service, Apple Computer, and his new home on wheels, Jim Sturm, a teacher at Wydown Middle School in Clayton, brings Lewis and Clark into the classroom using a satellite and the internet.
Well, right now we uplink the satellite, and what's neat about that right now is that the guys that are doing their journals on laptops and keeping track of the thing can now hook to the uplink, and they can update their journals. I'll be sending up video and pictures this afternoon to the website, and on Thursdays we go live back to classrooms all across the country. We just picked a time on 11:30 Central Time, and we do a Live with Lewis, a 20-minute broadcast that recaps the week and goes to the journals and says what Lewis did and then what this Corps of Discovery's done. And kids email us questions during that live broadcast.
We're going to talk a little bit today about what happened 200 years ago, and then we'll be taking a look at our last week on the river since we saw you last.
So do they compare the journals from Lewis and Clark's journals to the crew of today's
You betcha.
journals and
Yes,
see how they compare?
See how they compare, see what places are still the same and how things have changed. And it's kind of interesting, you know, if you look at some of the Lewis and Clark journals, you see some of the problems they had with crew members and those kind of things. And those kind of things of guys being away from home, and those kind of things crop up even now. It's kind of an interesting thing.
Now, like the original Corps of Discovery, they'll have the winter to rest and prepare at Camp Dubois, near Wood River, Illinois. These guys strive for historical accuracy down to minute details, including the length of their beards. But there are important differences. The average age on this trip is in the mid-60s. That's 40 years older than the original Corps. Today's replica boats have engines, and of course, this time they know exactly where they're going. Even so, they still can't be completely sure what they'll find until they get there.